There is a strange kind of surrender that passes in modern life for peace. A man is insulted, and he answers at once. A woman is ignored, and she burns for hours in silent argument. Someone doubts us, dismisses us, wounds our pride, and we rush, almost eagerly, to defend the little kingdom of self. We call this strength. We call it honesty. Yet very often it is only slavery with better manners. For every uncontrolled reaction is a kind of permission. It is the handing over of one's inner throne to whatever happened outside. A careless word from another becomes the ruler of your day. A stranger's opinion dictates your peace. Their anger becomes your anger, their chaos your captivity. Power is not first found in speaking louder, proving more, or winning every battle presented to us. Real power begins in the quiet, and often painful discipline of refusing to be governed by impulse. It is the strength to remain still when pride demands noise, to remain clear when emotion demands war, and to choose response where habit begs for reaction. The first defeat of a man rarely happens in public. It happens in the private chambers of his own spirit, in that swift and almost invisible moment when he chooses reaction over rule. Someone speaks against him, and before reason has time to arrive, anger has already taken the throne. A look, a tone, a slight insult, a forgotten respect, small things by appearance, yet often enough to provoke an inward collapse. We imagine surrender to be something grand and dramatic, but most surrender begins in these ordinary moments. There is something in human pride that cannot bear to be touched. We wish to think ourselves calm, reasonable, and self-possessed, but let one careless word strike the right nerve, and suddenly we discover how fragile our supposed peace really was. It is then that reaction appears not as a choice, but almost as a reflex. We answer too quickly, defend too fiercely, explain too much, or carry bitterness long after the offender has forgotten the offense entirely. This is why reaction is the first surrender. It is not merely emotion. Emotion itself is innocent enough. Anger may arise without invitation, hurt may arrive unannounced, disappointment may enter like rain through an open window. The surrender lies not in feeling, but in obedience to feeling. The moment emotion becomes master instead of messenger, authority is lost. A man who cannot govern his own spirit will soon find himself governed by everyone else. The world is full of people handing over their peace to strangers. A comment on a screen ruins their morning. A delayed reply destroys their confidence. A small rejection becomes a judgment on their entire worth. They live as if every outside event possesses the right to enter and rearrange the furniture of the soul. It is a miserable form of dependence, and yet so common that it passes for normal. But power was never meant to live in such conditions. True power requires ownership of the inner life. If another person can provoke your anger at will, they have discovered a handle by which they may move you. If your joy depends entirely upon praise, then praise has become your master. If your peace vanishes whenever circumstances refuse cooperation, then peace was never truly yours at all. It was only borrowed comfort. There is a peculiar dignity in restraint, not the restraint of fear, nor the silence of weakness, but the deliberate refusal to be dragged downward by every invitation to conflict. It takes far greater strength to remain composed than to explode. Anyone may shout, anyone may retaliate, even animals know how to react, but to pause, to examine, to choose, that belongs to character. The pause itself is often the battlefield. Between stimulus and response there exists a narrow space, so brief that many never notice it. Yet within that space lies freedom. The man who learns to live there becomes dangerous in the best sense, difficult to manipulate, difficult to disturb, difficult to conquer. He does not deny emotion, but he refuses its dictatorship. Most regrets are born in the absence of that pause. Words spoken in heat, decisions made in wounded pride, relationships broken for the sake of temporary satisfaction. These are monuments built to reaction. The tragedy is not merely the action itself, but the recognition afterward that silence would have been stronger, patience wiser, and restraint more victorious. Many confuse immediate response with authenticity. They believe that whatever is felt must be expressed at once, as though self-control were somehow dishonest. But truth does not require impulsiveness. In fact, what is most honest in us is often discovered after emotion has settled, when pride has quieted, and reason can finally speak without interruption. To react instantly is easy because it demands no discipline. It is surrender disguised as courage. It feels powerful because it is loud, but loudness is often the language of weakness. Real strength is quieter. It waits, it watches. It understands that not every insult deserves a defense, not every accusation requires an answer, and not every battle deserves the cost of one's peace. The first surrender is reaction because it opens the gate to every other defeat. Once a man loses command of himself, the world requires very little effort to control him. He becomes predictable, movable, easily wounded. But the one who masters this first battle begins to recover something rarer, the right to remain sovereign over his own soul. Silence is often mistaken for weakness because the world has trained us to admire noise. We are taught, almost from childhood, that power belongs to the loudest voice, the quickest reply, the sharpest defense. To remain silent when accused seems like defeat. To walk away from insult appears like surrender. To withhold explanation feels almost unnatural, as though dignity itself depends upon constant self-justification. Yet much of this is illusion, and a dangerous one. There is a kind of silence that is born from fear, certainly, a shrinking back, a refusal to stand where one ought to stand. But there is another silence altogether, and it is far more formidable. It is the silence of a man who does not need every misunderstanding corrected, because his worth is not built upon the unstable opinions of others. It is the silence of one who has learned that not every attack deserves the honor of his attention. Many people exhaust themselves trying to explain their intentions to those committed to misunderstanding them. They spend hours defending what was never truly on trial. They imagine that if only the right words were found, peace would follow. But some battles are not won by better arguments, they are prolonged by them. There are ears that do not listen, only wait for their turn to speak. To keep answering such noise is to become part of it. Silence protects inner power because it refuses unnecessary leakage. Every argument costs something. Every emotional defense drains strength. Every attempt to prove oneself to the wrong audience spends energy that can never be recovered. A man may lose more through explanation than he ever loses through accusation. The constant need to be understood is often less a pursuit of truth and more a hidden form of vanity. There is pride in over-explaining. It whispers that every false impression must be corrected, every criticism answered, every slight repaired. Yet pride is often disguised as righteousness. Sometimes the deepest wisdom is simply to let people think what they will and allow time to reveal what words cannot. Silence is not passivity, it is control. It is the refusal to place one's peace in the hands of another person's mood. When insult comes, silence asks a simple question: is this worth my spirit? Not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every provocation deserves participation. There is freedom in declining both. The undisciplined mind feels threatened by silence because silence demands confidence. To remain quiet while being misunderstood requires trust in something deeper than reputation. It requires the belief that truth does not always need immediate defense. The tree does not argue with the axe about its strength. Time reveals which one remains standing. Much of human conflict is sustained by mutual reaction. One harsh word seeks another. One accusation demands retaliation. Pride calls to pride, and both answer eagerly. Silence breaks this chain. It interrupts the machinery of escalation. It denies anger the fuel it expects. Often the most powerful statement is the one never spoken. This does not mean silence in the face of injustice, nor cowardice dressed as wisdom. There are moments when truth must be spoken clearly and courageously. But even then, power lies not in volume, but in restraint. The strongest words are often those chosen carefully, not thrown recklessly. Silence teaches speech its proper weight. There is also a private silence, perhaps even more important than the public one, the silence within. The mind that constantly argues with imagined enemies, replays old conversations, and rehearses future confrontations becomes a prison to itself. External quiet means little if inwardly there is endless noise. To protect inner power is to guard not only the tongue, but the thoughts that feed it. Peace is rarely stolen in a single dramatic event. More often, it leaks away through small daily disturbances we choose to entertain. Every unnecessary argument, every silent resentment, every obsession with being seen correctly. These are thieves that arrive politely and leave with authority. Silence closes the door to them. It preserves clarity. It allows a man to hear his own conscience above the chaos of public opinion. It creates room for discernment where reaction would have created only regret. The one who learns when not to speak begins to discover a strange kind of strength. The strength of being unshaken, unprovoked, and inwardly free. The world has a peculiar habit of confusing intensity with strength. A man who raises his voice is called powerful. One who strikes back immediately is praised for confidence. Anger is mistaken for courage, and emotional display is often treated as proof of authenticity. Yet if we look more carefully, much of what passes for strength is merely the absence of control. A storm is loud, but no one would call it wise. Real strength begins where impulse ends. It is not found in the freedom to express every feeling, but in the discipline to govern them. The man who cannot endure frustration without rage, disagreement without bitterness, or disappointment without collapse is not powerful. He is simply exposed. His emotions may be sincere, but sincerity alone is not maturity. A horse may be honest in its panic, but that does not make panic a virtue. Emotions themselves are not enemies. They are part of being human, and often they arrive before reason has even opened its eyes. Fear can warn us, anger can reveal injustice, sadness can remind us of what matters. But emotions were never meant to sit on the throne. They are signals, not sovereigns. Trouble begins when feeling is mistaken for final authority. Many people live under the rule of their moods without ever noticing it. If they feel inspired, they work. If they feel discouraged, they stop. If they feel offended, they retaliate. If they feel uncertain, they retreat. Their lives become a series of emotional weather reports, and their character changes with the forecast. Such a person may appear passionate, but passion without mastery is only instability with better language. Emotional control is often misunderstood as coldness, as though calmness were the enemy of sincerity. But restraint does not mean the absence of feeling, it means the presence of order. A bridge is not weak because it does not collapse under pressure. Its strength is proven precisely in its ability to remain standing. In the same way, character is revealed not when life is easy, but when provocation arrives and composure remains. There is a dignity in the person who can feel deeply without becoming ruled by what he feels. He may be angry, but he chooses justice over revenge. He may be hurt, but he refuses cruelty in return. He may be afraid, yet still moves toward what is right. This is strength, not the denial of emotion, but the refusal to be enslaved by it. The greatest battles are often invisible. They happen in the few silent seconds before a reply, in the moment before resentment becomes speech, in the choice to wait rather than wound. These moments are unimpressive to the world because they produce no spectacle. No applause follows self-restraint. No audience celebrates the argument never spoken. Yet these quiet victories build the architecture of a powerful life. It is easier to control others than to control oneself, and many prefer the easier task. They demand changed behavior from the world while neglecting the disorder within. But no external victory compensates for internal chaos. A man may command a room and still be a servant to his temper. He may influence thousands and remain helpless before his own pride. There is also a strange freedom in emotional discipline. The person who masters himself cannot be easily manipulated. Insults lose their power. Delays lose their tyranny. Rejection no longer defines identity. He becomes difficult to provoke because his peace is not rented from circumstances. It belongs to him by practice and principle. This does not happen by accident. Emotional control is not a personality trait reserved for the naturally calm. It is a form of training, often painful and rarely glamorous. It requires watching oneself honestly, admitting weakness without excuse, and choosing discipline repeatedly when indulgence would feel easier. It asks for patience in a culture addicted to immediacy. Most people wait to feel ready before acting wisely. The stronger soul acts wisely even when feeling refuses cooperation. He understands that character is not measured by what comes naturally, but by what is chosen deliberately. To be ruled by emotion is common. To master it is rare, and rarity is often the first sign of real strength. The loud world may never fully admire it, because self-control makes little noise, but the soul recognizes it at once. The quiet authority of a person who remains steady while everything around him demands surrender. One of the most expensive mistakes a person can make is to believe that every challenge deserves a response. We are strangely tempted by conflict, as though every disagreement were a summons to prove our worth. Someone questions us, and pride rises like a soldier hearing a trumpet. Someone disrespects us, and we feel an immediate duty to defend the territory of self. Yet much of life's exhaustion comes not from the battles we lose, but from the battles we were never meant to fight. There is a childish belief, though adults often wear it well, that silence means defeat and withdrawal means weakness. We imagine strength to be constant engagement, constant probing, constant resistance. But wisdom often begins with selection. A man who fights everything eventually stands for nothing, because all his energy is spent on noise rather than purpose. Not every battle deserves your energy because energy itself is sacred. Time, attention, peace of mind, these are not small possessions. They are the substance of life. To spend them carelessly is a kind of poverty. Yet many surrender them freely to trivial arguments, passing insults, and temporary offenses. They invest royal treasure in matters that are not worth a beggar's coin. Some conflicts are not opportunities for justice, but invitations to distraction. Their true purpose is not resolution but consumption. They lure the mind into endless explanation, endless irritation, endless rehearsals of what should have been said. One may win the argument and still lose the weak. There are victories so costly they resemble defeat. Pride makes poor calculations. It whispers that every criticism must be corrected, every misunderstanding repaired, every insult punished. But pride is less concerned with truth than with image. It cannot bear to be thought small, and so it spends itself trying to appear large. The wiser soul asks a different question, not "Can I answer this?" but "Should I?" There is immense power in discernment. To know what deserves your response, and what deserves your absence is one of the great arts of maturity. Some people are not seeking understanding, They are seeking reaction. To engage them is not courage, but cooperation with foolishness. Fire does not become noble because it accepts every piece of wood offered to it. Consider how much human misery is sustained by unnecessary participation. Feuds that began with a sentence. Friendships ruined over wounded ego. Nights lost to replaying insults from people whose opinions should never have carried such weight. Much suffering enters because we hold the door open for it, convinced that our dignity requires attendance. But dignity often requires departure. Walking away is not always retreat, sometimes it is the highest form of self-respect. Refusing to argue with foolishness is not weakness, but clarity. The lion does not pause to answer the opinions of sheep, not from arrogance, but because his identity does not depend upon their approval. This principle applies not only to people, but to thoughts. Not every anxious idea deserves belief. Not every fear deserves rehearsal. The mind, like the world, presents countless invitations to conflict. To entertain each one is to live in permanent siege. Wisdom means learning to let some thoughts pass without trial, some provocations fade without judgment. There are, of course, battles that must be fought. Injustice demands courage. Truth sometimes requires confrontation. Love itself can call for difficult resistance. But these necessary battles are made harder when we have wasted ourselves on trivial wars. A soldier who spends all his strength on shadows will have little left when the real enemy arrives. Peace is protected as much by refusal as by action. Sometimes the strongest decision is not what you confront, but what you decline. The refusal to explain yourself endlessly. The refusal to revenge every slight. The refusal to prove your value to those committed to blindness. A person who learns this becomes lighter, not because life offers fewer provocations, but because he no longer accepts every burden handed to him. He understands that self-mastery includes economy, the wise use of emotional resources. Attention becomes deliberate, energy becomes guarded. Peace is treated not as an accident, but as a responsibility. The world will continue offering battles without mercy. Some will look urgent, some righteous, some irresistible. But not every door that opens is meant to be entered, and not every war announced is yours to fight. Between what happens to us and what we do about it, there exists a space so small that most people never notice it. An insult is spoken, a disappointment arrives, a message is ignored, an expectation is broken, and almost instantly the machinery of reaction begins. Words rush to the tongue, conclusions rush to the mind, and emotion demands immediate obedience. It all happens with such speed that many call it honesty, as though impulsiveness were proof of truth. Yet in that small invisible space lies one of the greatest forms of human freedom. The pause before response is not emptiness, it is authority. It is the narrow gate through which wisdom enters and regret is kept outside. Most people do not lose peace because life is difficult. They lose it because they answer life too quickly. The instinct to react immediately feels natural because it is old. Pride dislikes delay. Anger hates reflection. Fear wants instant escape. The self, when left untrained, behaves much like a child, convinced that whatever it feels in the moment must be acted upon at once. But maturity is not the destruction of feeling. It is the refusal to let feeling become law. To pause before responding is to interrupt the tyranny of impulse. It is to ask before speaking whether these words belong to truth or merely to wounded pride. It is to ask before deciding whether this action serves peace or only temporary satisfaction. The person who learns this pause begins to live less like a victim of circumstance and more like a steward of the soul. Most damage in human relationships is done in moments too brief to seem important. A sentence spoken in heat, a reply sent in resentment, a decision made under humiliation, small things by measure, yet large in consequence. Entire friendships collapse over what was said in 2 angry minutes. Years of trust are undone by one moment without restraint. Regret often enters wearing the face of urgency. We tend to imagine wisdom as something grand and philosophical, but often it is simply delay, waiting 10 minutes before answering, sleeping one night before deciding, allowing silence to cool what emotion has overheated. Time has a way of exposing false emergencies. What felt unbearable at midnight often looks absurd by morning. There is humility in the pause because it admits that our first reaction may not be our best one. Pride assumes immediate certainty. Humility allows examination. It recognizes that anger can exaggerate, fear can distort, and hurt can make villains where there are only flawed human beings. The pause gives truth a chance to arrive before judgment declares itself king. This is especially difficult because the modern world worships immediacy. Speed is praised as intelligence, instant replies as care, immediate opinions as confidence. Silence is treated as weakness and hesitation as incompetence. We are trained to believe that faster means stronger. Yet much of true strength is slow. Trees do not grow in haste. Character does not form in urgency. A person who pauses becomes difficult to manipulate. Insults lose their command because they no longer produce automatic obedience. Flattery loses its control because approval is examined rather than swallowed. Even fear begins to lose its throne because panic cannot survive long under patient scrutiny. The pause turns reaction into choice, and choice is where freedom lives. This does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming deliberate. A calm response is not less sincere than an immediate one, often it is more so. The first response is frequently the voice of ego. The considered response is often the voice of conscience. One seeks victory, the other seeks what is right. There is also mercy hidden in delay. How many words would never be spoken if given 1 hour of silence? How many accusations would dissolve if granted one night of reflection? To pause is not only to protect oneself, but often to protect others from the worst version of us. The strongest people are rarely the quickest to speak. They understand that power is not measured by speed of reaction, but by mastery of response. They know that life will keep presenting provocations, and that peace depends not on preventing them, but on refusing to become their servant. In the smallest pause before response, a man decides whether he will be ruled by the world or remain ruler of himself.